In this video, I want to go over my thoughts and experiences using the Yamaha YC-88 over the last year. Over 100 events in total. We were just so fortunate to be able to have a good season after so many years. Everything from fairs and festivals to clubs and corporate and private parties. And I want to go over my thoughts about the keyboard and everything that I experienced up to date, and all the things I loved about it, the things that I might change about it, and maybe even a wish list of things I'd add. Let's check it out. Hey guys, it's Steve from Featherlightstudio, and it has been a challenging couple of years for all of us, for really everybody, but especially for musicians and performers, because so many of the clubs either got completely restructured or they got downsized or even went out of business altogether, and it really made it challenging for us to play in our normal venues, in our normal, fairs and festivals and that kind of stuff. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences with the Yamaha YC-88 and how it's performed all throughout those different experiences and different kinds of gigs. And we've played everything from clubs and club venues to festivals and fairs and private and corporate parties, in tiny little cramped spaces and some much bigger venues, and how those really differ from one to the other. And one of the very first things I personally noticed with this keyboard that I am just incredibly grateful for, and it doesn't sound like, an incredibly high ticket item or whatever, but honestly, it's the XLR outputs on this. These are amazing because they basically take the place of always having to hope that the venue has a couple of spare DI boxes around, especially good quality DI boxes around, and two of them. And this just takes all the worry out of it altogether. I can get my sound out of my own stuff, my own setup, exactly the way I want it, including everything that goes through the audio inputs, the left and right audio inputs. So my entire rack sound and all my additional modules all go through there. The front of house guy just takes the left and right XLR outputs and everything is mixed out of there. He doesn't have to do anything else and it sounds great. This has been a real godsend, and it's just been a real joy to use, and not something that I really would have thought about until I got out, and on the road, especially doing a bunch of different clubs and venues. That's a real problem solver. One of the other things that I didn't really think about until I owned it for a while is the additional audio inputs on the back of the YC. This allows you to take all of your existing sound modules, like if you have an existing one off to the side, for example, or one in a rack, and simply wire them directly into the YC. The YC mixes it with the internal audio of the internal sounds and spits the entire thing out the main outs, neat and tidy. Everything is clean as can be. Your setup is super streamlined. And this can be anything. It's not just synthesizers. It's anything that's line level. So this could be, another mixer input, or it can be an entire rack of stuff like I have here. It's really a game changer in just keeping everything into one signal path, and that definitely cuts down on stuff like hum and buzz and a bunch of additional wiring. Another great feature of the YC series keyboards is its MIDI control capabilities. And I mean old school 5-pin DIN MIDI, not the USB MIDI, and all of the audio interface and interface capabilities of the USB MIDI side. This is completely separate, and it really adds a huge amount of power to it. So the master control features of the keyboard itself are pretty extensive, and a lot of stuff you'd only find on really a dedicated controller. So the additional sounds and all the sound engines and amazing stuff on it is just extra. I used a double keyboard setup several times this year on bigger gigs, and this worked out really, really well. You can even use the external keyboard for the upper manual of your organ patches, and the YC can play the bottom like a B3 would. That's a lot of power and flexibility for something that packs this much stuff into one keyboard, especially for a live performance rig. That gives you a ton of options, super flexible, and you still have all of the capabilities of the USB side of things in addition. So it's also pretty hard to talk about the YC series of keyboards without talking about the iOS integration. It is probably some of the best integration I've ever seen on any keyboard, and I've owned a lot of keyboards, Nords and Rolands and Korgs and Kurzweils and things, but if somebody gets it right, you got to give them kudos, and Yamaha absolutely got this one right. In fact, knocked it out of the park. It really is as simple as just grabbing a USB cable and plugging it into your iOS device, be it a phone or an iPad or whatever you have. An instant connection to any of your iOS devices. And this is just a hugely powerful thing, not just to be able to build layers with the YC and your iOS device sound modules. And, you know, I mean, that's really almost an unlimited combination of things by the time you consider, you know, things like GarageBand or standalone ones like this from Korg. This is Korg module, but there's just a million of them out there. And having such instant and stable integration is a huge thing. This has really become my worship team setup almost completely now, just because you can build such huge layers between just the iPad and the YC, and having a wired connection like this that is so dependable on an iOS or mobile device is a huge benefit, in addition to using its onboard audio interface and then mix all the output from the iOS sound applications directly to the main volume of the YC, and everything, including the iOS applications, get controlled by the main volume knob. That's a huge plus, and like I said, it can't really be overstated. That's a really impressive and stable feature that is utterly usable in a live environment. So you really can't talk about the YC series of keyboards without mentioning the control surfaces and the options there. Simple things like the ability to fade in and out the organ as a layer, and that adds something like a horn patch or a horn voice on the modulation lever on top of that. So if you're swelling, without a doubt, one of the most groundbreaking changes to the entire YC ecosystem was the firmware update to 1.20. That really was a game changer. It allowed me to sell my Stage 3 and my Neo ventilator, which I was using on the Stage 3 to get a more realistic organ sound. And that was already pretty close. So this new firmware added a new rotary organ simulation called Studio. So it still has the previous ones, it has Classic and the previous ones. But Studio changed the landscape when it came to organ emulations. It's absolutely as good as my Neo, and in some ways better, certainly when it comes to things like its ability to be manipulated or to be controlled. My Neo, when I was using it on the outputs of the Nord, basically controlled everything. So I had to keep stepping on and off the pedal to turn it on and off because it's a stereo pedal and all my stereo sounds would go through it. So having it inside the patch and then having the effects be able to operate on that is a game changer. Without a doubt, it's a game changer. Because in addition to adding the new rotary sounds, the new firmware update brought new effects and new EQ effects, which means you could zero in on just a really small part of that rotary organ sound. And maybe if it was too brittle on top or maybe too boomy on the bottom, you could add one of those EQs in your effects list. And you could zero in on just that to level it out, and that made a gigantic difference because in the past, if you add a YC, you were always using the onboard master EQ to kind of make up the difference. And that was great, but that was great only for that patch. Now you can do it per patch. And then you can use the master equalizer for what it was really intended for, which is to kind of equalize the room or equalize different sound systems that you play under. And there's a ton. If you do a lot of different kinds of gigs or clubs or venues, having that is a lifesaver. But you want to be able to use it for that and not to have to use it to equalize the organ deficiencies. Now there are none. So that's a huge game changer. And there was a bunch of other stuff too. There was a whole FM organ algorithm update, and it didn't just add new capabilities to the FM synth part of it, like the ability to create, Vox and Continental and that kind of stuff, those kind of organ sounds, it actually added real FM synthesis to the board, something that the YC's never really even been able to do before. And it adds a bunch of new capabilities and sound design possibilities. So without a doubt, that was my favorite event of all, was the new firmware update, just because it changed completely the overall sound of the board and how you integrated with it. All right, so no board is perfect, and it's time for some cons and some wish list items. Even though, in all fairness, I got to admit, this is about as close as I've come to one of the best live performance boards I've ever worked or used. There are a few things that I really do miss about my Nord. I miss the ability to load different samples into the sample library. I don't miss having to juggle which fidelity of sound I'm going to load in there and kind of judge that against the value of all the other sounds that are in there, and then try to pick like a lower fidelity one and one that doesn't take up quite as much memory space or whatever. I don't miss that at all, but I do miss the ability to change the sounds out, and that was a pretty big plus for the Nord for sure. The one thing that the YC definitely has going for it in that regard is it just has a huge library of sounds. It's got a ton of stuff already in there. And so most of the stuff that I would use is already in the library, and it's already pretty good. If I need more stuff than that, I'm probably not gonna reach for it on this board. I'd probably reach for it on an iOS app or another module or something, or that kind of thing. So I definitely miss that about the Nord, but in terms of overall flexibility, I'll take the way this kind of manages what's there. The one thing that the Nord did have over this is that you could load in sounds that weren't necessarily bread and butter sounds or even piano sounds, but like special effects or things that were specific to like your show or your setup or things like that. And that was a pretty cool thing. So yeah, I definitely miss that. And another wish list or con is the key triggering. So on the 88 note version of the board, you've got the weighted and graded version of the keyboard, which I personally love. I'm kind of a heavy-handed keyboard player anyway. I was kind of brought up in the R&B days, and so I'm usually kind of digging into the board, so that doesn't bother me. But I know for organ players specifically, if you're playing notes that have repeated notes, if you want to be able to do real organ, like run notes, the note doesn't trigger from the top of the key bit. It triggers about halfway down. So it's fairly fast for organ, but it's a little sluggish. I mean, an 88 note weighted board is already pretty sluggish for organ, but I think having the ability to trigger the note for organ at the top of the key release, especially on the 61 note version of the board of the YC, because that really is organ centric, organ specific. And on that key bed specifically, I know a lot of people have asked for that, and I think that would be a big advantage. So one of the things I love most about the YC, without a doubt, is the ability to assign sounds to all these different parameters and controllers. It's one of the huge advantages of all the YC boards. What would be great, if I'm wishing, is to be able to do the same thing to the drawbar section, or at least assign these MIDI control so that you could control individual drawbar settings in other applications. So far, I haven't been able to figure out a way to actually assign the individual drawbars iOS controller information for things like B3X. I know they do produce control information. I know they produce a continuous controller information, but not all of the apps speak the same language, so they don't all interpret the data the same way. And I know that's probably a way to do that, but so far there's no real easy way to just, have it kind of auto learn that. Yeah, if I had a wish list, that would definitely be on it. I know that's a lot to ask because that's kind of getting into Yamaha's, little technical backyard there, but if you could make it happen, maybe kind of you guys meet up for coffee at a NAMM show or something, that would be awesome. One of the other things that I've really found myself using a lot, especially when you're on the road, is the built-in audio interface inside the YC. This and a laptop is really a complete production station. In fact, really, in all honesty, this and an iPad is a complete production station. Especially if you have something like Cubase or something like that, you literally have a full-blown workstation in every respect, and they don't even really cut corners any longer. Now it's complete. But the one thing that I wish Yamaha would do is make the audio inputs actually send audio to the audio interface. If the YC is connected to a laptop or an iPad and you're using an iOS app or you're using a DAW on your laptop, it'll send all the audio, including vocals and everything, to the main outs of the YC and the headphone outs. But it'll only send the digital onboard audio engines the other direction, like towards, the DAW. And what would really be cool is if you could use the analog inputs as audio mic pre's and then record audio as well. And that would make it, I know this is like a huge wish list of stuff, but that would really make it like the keyboard from just Doom, because it would pretty much do everything right there. So I know it's a lot to ask, but if I had, one wish, especially as a traveling musician where you're doing a ton of different kinds of stuff and you're spending a lot of nights away, the ability to use the audio inputs as mic pre's and send audio in addition to all the sound engine sounds down the USB MIDI cable to the DAW, that would be awesome. So there's been pros and cons for every board I've ever owned, but if I'm being honest, this probably has a whole lot less cons than any of the other boards I've had, especially with the late firmware updates and stuff that it's had. It's really, it's just supercharged this thing into like a class of its own. And when I first got it, I was really kind of on the fence after owning the Nord and stuff, and there was a lot of stuff that I was wishing that it still did. But after the new firmware update and all of the revisions and everything, I don't at all. Kudos to Yamaha for getting it right. This has really been a powerhouse keyboard to use, and it's been a joy to use over the last year. So, hey, if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It really does help keep the channel going, and it helps me make more videos like this. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. Stay safe, be creative. Add something creative to the world. It could really use it. I'll catch you guys in the next video.